There we go. Last week, we started what was originally going to be a single lesson, then turned into 2 lessons, then turned into 3 lessons, and at this point is going to be 4 more over 1 Timothy chapters 2 and 3, which goes to show that sometimes you bite off more than you can chew. And so we have advanced our way through chapter 2, and we're now at 1 Timothy chapter 3. And the difficult part with this, we're going to be looking at the qualifications here stated for elders. And the difficult part with this text is that every translation renders the list a little bit differently. And some of them will refer to 2 different terms using the same word. And so if I just pick an English word to go with, then it's very easy to get lost in the passage. And so, at least for my own notes, I have everything listed out by the original terms. But I think that would be very confusing for you. And so I still don't know the best way to refer to all of these. So we're going to see what we figure out. But one of the first things to remember and to realize in this text is that Timothy is not establishing elders for the first time. When Paul writes to Titus and Paul writes to Timothy, he writes to them about the same time, between his first and second Roman imprisonments. And he writes the letters of 1st and 2nd Timothy to Timothy in Ephesus, and the letter of Titus to Titus in Crete. When he writes to Titus, he tells him to set in order what remains and appoint elders in every city as I directed you, Titus 1 verse 5, which suggests to us that at least when Titus got there were not elders in every city. There was a lack of leadership in the churches in Crete. And maybe Paul noticed this whenever he stopped on the island on his way to the first Roman imprisonment. That's the only record we have of Paul ever visiting the island. So it's possible he noticed that while he was there and sends Titus to take care of things. But the churches in Ephesus, Paul is much more familiar with. They did have elders. The churches in Ephesus have been around for quite some time as a product of Paul's efforts, as well as Aquila and Priscilla, Apollos, and now finally Timothy and his work. While traveling to Caesarea, or I guess this way for you, while traveling to Caesarea from Corinth, Paul stopped at Miletus, which is a little island off the coast of Asia, to meet with the Ephesian elders. Acts 20, verse 17. And the letter that he writes to Timothy, 1 Timothy, he writes that about 5 to 10 years later. And I know that's a big range, but that's about the range, depending on when Paul was executed. And so I see 2 major reasons for Paul to write to Timothy about the qualifications, about what it takes to be an elder. First reason is that eventually the men who were elders are going to grow old. And maybe they will pass away, and it's hard to start from the grave. Or perhaps they are going to become too feeble to continue working. And as a result of that, new men have to be appointed through the course of time. They must be identified and appointed in order to maintain the proper leadership and organization of the Lord's church. But the second reason pertains to Paul's original warnings that he gave in Acts chapter 20 to the elders who are already serving. Acts chapter 20, verses 28 through 31, he warns them. It says, "Be on guard for yourselves and for all the flock, among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. I know that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And from among your own selves men will arise speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after them. Therefore be watchful, remembering that night and day for a period of 3 years I did not cease to admonish each one with tears. So Paul recognizes that the office of the elder, the office of the shepherd, the overseer, is a unique position. These men are poised to either be able to lead and protect the flock of God, or else corrupt and consume them as wolves. Those are very different. And that's the potential. Because of the role that they are put into and the responsibility that's placed upon their shoulders. And so, yes, it's true that Timothy is going to need to appoint men as needed in the churches in Ephesus, but he also has a role to exhort the existing men, the existing eldership, to be faithful and to continue in the work of defending and protecting the flock. So when we come over to back to 1 Timothy chapter 3, and we look at this, I don't want us to just look at it as in quite the same way as we look at the list in Titus. They're obviously very similar lists. They're equivalent lists. But I don't want us to just look at it as, okay, these are the things that we're looking for in men to appoint. These are not just characteristics at the beginning. He is describing the kind of men that you should be as elders. And so as I bring forth God's word to you this evening, I'm not just trying to fill your heads with general biblical knowledge, but I exhort our elders here to give heed to these instructions, to be the kind of men that God describes for you to be. Okay, so as we look through this, this is more than just a haphazard list. And there are different ways of organizing these qualifications. And I think it's helpful to, so that we don't just spend a tremendous amount of time, looking at definitions and such. Some of you know my friend Anthony, and we had worked together to come up with a grouping of types of qualifications that some of these were. So some of them being spiritual qualifications, behavioral, mental, intellectual, that sort of thing. And I don't mind that, but that's not how I want to look at it tonight. I want to look at it as it is arranged. Paul makes a lot of lists in his letters, and I don't believe that he puts things in a random order. I think he's very purposeful about it. So the first thing is in verse 1. In verse 1, he tells them to be serious, to take this role seriously. He says, it is a trustworthy saying, if a man aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a good work. Now, something I'd always thought before when I'd read this, when it uses this word overseer, the word means someone who looks out over. It literally means an overseer. It's a very direct translation. But I went ahead and I took a look at the way this word is used throughout the New Testament and throughout the Old Testament as well. And it has with it the idea not just of a stone-hearted observation. This is not a word that means a manager. This word is actually used several times of God to refer to, he uses it of himself to describe how he cares for his people. It means to watch over in a careful way, in a way that is loving and sees the people as your protector. Okay? So, first of all, in the role itself, as he describes, you are to be caring. That is part of what it means to be an overseer. And I have often seen verse 1 used as a secret qualification, right? In verse 2, he says an overseer therefore must be, and then he gives all these descriptions. But in verse 3, he says, if a man aspires to the office of an overseer, he desires a good work. And so I've heard it said many times, someone has to want to be. Well, that's very common sense. It's very common sense that you're not going to do something you don't want to do. But really what Paul is saying is that the church needs leadership. The church needs overseers, shepherds who will take care of her, and that men who fit these qualifications ought to step up to this role. That's what he's describing for us, okay? Because of the severe need that there is. An overseer, therefore, must be above reproach. That's the first one he actually lists as a qualification. The New American Standard and the NIV have above reproach. The King James, New King James here have blameless. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is a person who has a spiritual quality about them. There's no charge that can be levied against them. They live an upright and proper life. In a very basic sense, they are a righteous person. This is not a role for Joe Tuesday who comes in and lives his life however he wants. Joe Tuesday doesn't refer to anybody specific, by the way. It's just some random name I made up. They are to be righteous men. And as he goes through, he's going to describe what this means in greater detail. You might even say that the way this word is used here at the beginning, sandwiched in verse 7 with having a good reputation with those who are without, these terms really sum up all of the other qualifications. Okay? The second thing here, an overseer therefore must be above reproach, the husband of one wife. This is about the only one where you will see a term translated consistently in every translation, husband of one wife. And that's because that's exactly what the original term says, a husband of one woman, a husband of one wife. Now, is Paul describing here the actual quantity of spouses that a man has ever had? This is dead again, isn't it? Is he actually describing the number of spouses that a man has ever had? Okay, that's a possibility. I'm not going to say that isn't a valid way of reading this. But I want you to notice in chapter 5, verse 9. In chapter 5, Paul is describing widows. Okay? Now, last time I checked, a widow is no longer married because her husband has passed away. But he's describing the qualifications for widows to be placed on the roll for the church to support them and to take care of them. In verse 9 he says, a widow is to be put on the list only if she is not less than 60 years old, having been the wife of one man. I don't appreciate the italicized having been, because this sentence is in the present tense. It is not in the past tense. It's not in the perfect tense. It is in the present. That she is still the wife of one husband. It's actually the exact same term used in chapter 3, but with the terms man and woman swapped. Okay? It's the same expression. What is he talking about here when he talks about this widow? Is he saying that she can only have ever been married to one man? That is possible. But it is certainly the case that the emphasis is on her fidelity, on her faithfulness to her husband. Couldn't Paul have just said that they are to be faithful to their spouses? Yes, that is true. And I'll grant you that. And this is a very, you can go back and forth on this. I believe this is one of the more difficult questions in these qualifications. Whether he means that the man must still be married, whether he can have been married more than once in a proper and scriptural way, of course. I don't know. I don't have a full answer for you as much as I would like to. I do not believe, based on the discussion of widows, that his wife must presently be living. I will go ahead and put that out there. I do not believe that to be the case. But in any case, it is saying that he must be a faithful husband. He must take his role, not just as a Christian seriously, but take his role in the family seriously. That he sees the importance of honoring his role as a husband, and we're going to come back to that in a verse or two. Okay, so he says that this man must be caring, he must be righteous, he must be faithful as a husband. And of course, we can understand exactly how that is going to correspond to his attitude in the church. Like we talked about this morning, the church is married to Christ. And the husband who understands what it is to be faithful to his wife is going to understand what it means for the church to be faithful to her bridegroom as well. The third term here is translated in the New American Standard, the NIV, and the New King James as temperate or vigilant in the Old King James. Now, this word here, it means clear-headed. Okay, this is a man who he has his wits about him. He is mentally there. He's still sharp. He is able to process the problems that come his way, and this is critical if you're going to be able to deal with conflicts. You're going to be able to deal with false teaching, to see people for who they really are, whether for good or for ill. He has to be able to... This term ties in very closely to the next one, so I'm actually going to combine them. The fourth term here is translated differently in every translation I looked at. New American Standard has prudent. My translation, the Legacy, has sensible. NIV has self-controlled. New King James has sober-minded. King James has sober. They couldn't decide what a good way to sum this word up was. But it's very closely related to the previous word. It means self-controlled. And it derives from a term that means being of sound mind. Hence the idea of soberness, or prudence. But actually here, I do think that the NIV has it most correct in rendering this as self-control. Being able to control one's physical and sensual desires. And when you combine these two, when you combine temperate and prudent in the New American Standard, you get a picture that this is a person, this is a man who thinks in a spiritual way. He does not allow his flesh to control him, but instead he uses his mind, he uses his spirit, which has been trained in a spiritual way, to guide him rather than his emotions, rather than his lusts and desires. So, self-control. And of course, with both of those, we get a hint at another one that we're going to come up on when it comes to intoxicating substances. Then this fifth term here. I really like this fifth term. New American Standard and NIV have respectable, King James, New King James, of good behavior. This is one of my favorite terms here. This word is the same, and I believe I pointed this out, as in 2 verse 9, the word that is rendered proper clothing or modest clothing. This word means respectable, orderly, well-behaved. I would describe this is a man who is dignified, a man who has a characteristic of respectability and dignity about him. He is not a silly man. He is not frivolous. But again, just like with all of these, he is serious about his spirituality. He is serious about himself. He takes life, he sees life for what it is, a responsibility rather than just a fun activity. And this is one of those characteristics. This is one of those characteristics when you meet a man who is respectable. You know it. It may not be the word that comes into your mind, but a man who is respectable commands respect. It's easy to listen to the wisdom. It's easy to heed the advice of a man who is respectable, who has his life put together, which is part of what that word means. Okay? Next, he uses the word hospitable, which is pretty consistent. I don't know why this one is grouped in with some of these others here. Maybe we're starting to get into the qualifications about how he deals with people. Are dealt with. There's several different aspects of teaching, but I believe this is one of the most important characteristics because I see this as the main role of the elders, is to be the ones who teach the flock. Okay? So, we'll just put this one by itself. Teaching. Okay? Not just you can, but you do. What's the point in having a skill if you don't use it? In verse 8, I guess I didn't print off all my pages. In verse 8, verse 3, I don't know why I said 8, verse 3, he says, not addicted to wine, NIV, not given to drunkenness, King James, New King James, not given to wine. Okay? Now, we're not going to get into tonight a discussion of alcohol and the Christian in general. But what this word describes itself is not someone who who allows alcohol to overtake their actions. Okay, the second word here that's translated addicted to wine, given to drunkenness, given to wine. It's used of drunks, right? Someone who allows substances to enter his mind and to change the way he behaves. The purpose of this qualification is not just to be a check mark of, do I see him at the bar? The purpose of this qualification is that the elders are to be in control of their actions. And this ties back in with being self-control. Not just that he has control of his wits, but he has control of his behavior. And there are plenty of things besides alcohol which can affect that. And the reason I'm bringing this out is not because I want to minimize the discussion of alcohol, but because this means more than it has often been granted to me. Nothing is to corrupt his behavior. It's not to allow anything to take over. And that brings us into the others that he has here. And I'm just going to describe these. That he is stalwart. He is not going to move. Okay? Nothing is going to move him. Nothing is going to affect his behavior. We'll go ahead and write alcohol here, if I can spell. The second one here is or pugnacious. I don't know why they used a $5 word there. Not violent, NIV New King James. No striker, King James. This is a person who is a bully, a person who uses either their physical presence or their words to intimidate the church, to intimidate other people into getting what they want. Okay? A key element of these qualifications that we're looking at in this section is that it's not about getting your way. And you have to have the kind of attitude where you are willing to give up your own will for a will that is greater than your own. Okay? That means that you cannot allow other influences to let your true desires come forth and change the way you behave. It means that you're not bullying people around. And I don't really have a more succinct way of saying that. But I've known elders who were like this, who would use their position in the community, who would use their money, who would use their, even their physical presence to push people around and get their own way. And that is not a characteristic worthy of an elder in the church. Then in the King James and New King James, you have this term here, not greedy of filthy lucre. King James, not greedy for money. New King James. There's a very similar one at the end of verse 3, so we'll come back to that. But if you have any other translation, you'll notice that expression isn't there in that part of the verse. Next he says, gentle, New American Standard, NIV, New King James, considerate, patient, King James. And this is a word that I've talked about before, where it means that you're right, and you know you're right, and the other person is wrong, and you don't push it. You don't press the issue because it doesn't matter. And you care more about peace than having your own will fulfilled. Okay? I think I like best here on this word, considerate. Right? I like that. One lexicon said, disinclined to fight. You're not looking for a chance to battle it out, to prove your manliness over other members, not looking for a chance to best the other elders in a verbal battle, but rather you're looking out for the needs of the church, for the needs of God's people. Okay? Peaceable. Then we have free from the love of money, not a lover of money, not covetous. This is a man who is satisfied with what he has. If you are satisfied with what you have and you're not greedy, you're not filled with covetousness and desiring stuff and things, it'll be a lot harder. It'll be a lot harder to bribe you, not just in a monetary sense, but it'll be harder to change the way you make decisions away from having a spiritual approach. Okay? I'm pulling up the rest of my notes on my phone because they disappeared on me. Sorry. All right. Verses 4 and 5. Leading his own household well, having his children in submission with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to lead his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? This is the only characteristic of all of these. Most of these deal with characteristics that really are befitting of any person. Right? These are all very good qualities. Not that these aren't qualities that are good of every person, but these are the only qualities that specifically address leadership ability. Okay? These all deal with how you treat people, how you make decisions, what you allow to influence you. But in verses 4 and 5, he brings out that you do have to be a good leader. And he doesn't say that you have to be a successful businessman to be an elder. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say that you have to have a high position in the community, that you have to be an elder at the gates of the city. He doesn't say that you need to have generated a certain amount of income. No. The standard that God has that determines whether or not you are a good leader is how you have led your household. Now, why do I say household instead of family? Because I want for us to remember what a first century Hellenistic household looked like. This is not just talking about, he does bring out his children, of course, but it's not just about his children. His household is going to include his wife as well, first of all. It's going to include his children, and it's also going to include his slaves. Now, I hope none of you have slaves, okay? I hope that's the case. That's illegal. And if that's a problem, then, you can meet with Tommy afterwards. But what he's bringing out here is that not just the way you handle your family, but the way you handle business as well does matter. It's not that you need to be successful in business, but the way you lead, the way you treat people, the influence that you set. And you look at a man like Abraham. Abraham is a great example of this. When God chooses him, he says, "I chose him because I know that he will lead his household well." When God gives he institutes circumcision for Abraham, he doesn't just make Abraham circumcise himself and his sons, but also all of his servants. Though there are those who are under you, whom you are responsible for. And this verse is talking about how you lead all of them. Now, I have seen this verses 4 and 5 turn into or be transformed from what it actually says into are all of his children Christian? That's not what this says. Okay? There are men who have led their households very well, and yet their children have fallen away. There are men who have done a very poor job at leadership, and yet their children are Christians in spite of it all. It's not just about whether or not they are currently faithful. It is about how he has done as a father and as a husband. He must have demonstrated real leadership ability in his home and in business if applicable. It's not saying that he has to have had employees, but if you have had employees and you've treated them like dirt, you're not qualified. Okay? Then in verse 6, he moves on. He says, not a new convert, not a recent convert, NIV, not a novice, King James, and New King James. And the reason he brings this out is it's not just about being a noble person, being a noble man who is wise, but it is about being a spiritual man. A man who loves God, who knows what God requires of him, who knows the kinds of challenges that your flock is going to face. Now, this is one of the few that hopefully has no way of really receding after you become an elder, right? It's hard to take a step backward in age and experience, right? Well, most of these, you can mess up after the fact. This one is really about the appointing side of things. So I'm not going to spend much time on that. But his rationale here is so that you will not become conceited and prideful. Because you look at this new position you have and you think, wow, look what I am. Look what I have accomplished. When Paul spoke to the elders in Acts chapter 20, in chapter 20, verse 28, he said, take heed to the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. You did not simply achieve this on your own, but you've been granted a privilege and a responsibility by God himself. Okay? He expresses that there. Okay. Then verse 7. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. The NIV has, instead of those outside the church, it has with outsiders. New King James, having a good testimony among those who are outside. King James, a good report of them which are without. I've heard multiple stories of both preachers and elders who the church had a great level of respect for, but it was discovered too late that in the community, these men had reputations of being philanderers, of being coarse and wicked men. And what's interesting is in those cases, the people outside the church actually knew these men better than those inside the church. And that's because whether we want to think about it or not, there are some men who are very good at pretending. We're extremely good at feigning these qualities. And that happens within the church. It's not necessarily about feigning this all the time, but feigning all of this, pretending, putting on a show for those who care, for those who are going to see it and care. And I think it's really horrific how many stories. I'm not very old, but I could tell you probably 10 different stories of men who are like this, who portray themselves one way in the church and have the entire congregation fooled for years. But people who actually truly know them know that they are wicked and base men. And God knows that that's the case. So you need to verify their character. And it would be lovely. I really can't spell tonight. Character. It would be lovely if we didn't have to say that there, but sometimes that's the case. But when we put all of this together, and we get this picture, we see a man who doesn't have to command the children of God, because the kind of person he is enough that people will want to follow him. Christians who are faithful, who want to serve Christ, will look at this man and see that he reflects the chief shepherd. That they will see he's the kind of man that in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 25, Peter says, you were continually straying like sheep, but now you've returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. Christ is described as being the shepherd, as being the ultimate overseer. He is, if we're going to, we don't have bishops who are over our elders, but if we have a bishop, our singular bishop is Christ. He is the one who is over all elderships around the globe throughout time. And your job as elders is simply to reflect that. To have these characteristics, because these are the same characteristics. You take every single one of these. He didn't have children, but he did have disciples. You take every single one of these characteristics and apply it to Christ. I want you to think about that. That's the kind of men that you are to be. You are to be the chief examples in the church of what it means to be Christ-like. And I encourage you, I encourage the elders, and I thank you for your good work and for being this kind of men. And I pray that you do continue in these qualities. You continue to live in a sober and a righteous way, and to continue to set the kind of example you do. And I exhort all of us to submit to them in their work and in their leadership. They've worked hard to do everything that they have put in place. They've worked hard to be this kind of man, and that's why they're there. If you have any need to make changes of any kind, if you need to return to the chief shepherd because of error in your life, you need to make any changes, fix anything, attitude-wise, morality-wise, any of those things we talked about this morning. Whatever it is, come forward while we stand and sing.